Without looking at the title of this message, somebody tell me what you think maybe this sermon might be on. Anybody? Nobody? There you go. Relationships, what? We've already seen the title. So it's like, I don't know, I'd be cheating if I said something, right? Friendships, right? Relationships, friendships in particularly, we're talking about sharpening friendships because friendships, especially in our day and age, friendships are increasingly relationships that seem to elude many people. I remember growing up, I would constantly hear from my mom and from my dad, from Sunday school teachers, from counselors and such that if you could just find one good, true friend in life, you ought to consider yourself, anybody know what the rest of it is? Lucky, or we're Baptists, blessed, okay? Blessed, okay? We don't have potlucks, we have pot blessings. No, I'm just kidding. We ought to consider ourselves blessed. Those words are true, but as true as they are, they can also be extremely soul-crushing for some. Because at present, there are over 8 billion people in this world. And if it is true that if you can find one out of 8 billion people, if you can find one that becomes a true friend, you are blessed. That can be soul-crushing. That's harder than finding a needle in a haystack. The truth is that it is much easier for previous generations, though, to forge these friendships than it is in our present generation. Digital connectivity has made physical and emotional connectivity all the more difficult, exponentially more difficult than in previous generations. Jonathan Haidt, a sociologist and professor at New York University, he wrote this. He says, time with friends began decreasing for young people in the 2000s, but the drop accelerated in the 2010s, while it barely changed for older people. By 2019, young people's time with friends had dropped to just 67 minutes a day. And you got to keep in mind, we're talking about school time as well. 67 minutes a day. It turns out that Gen Z had been socially distancing for many years and had mostly completed the project by the time COVID-19 struck. He goes on to say that because Gen Z grew up online, they have dozens of interactions, changing relationships to being broad, but not very deep. And on top of that, because what you put online can be seen by thousands, if not millions of people, and what goes online at some point stays online, one's reputation is always on the line. And so he says these communications thus tend to be more performative and anxiety-inducing than one-to-one conversations. Haidt then goes on to say, real-world interactions usually take place within communities that have a high bar for entry and exit. So people are strongly motivated to invest in relationships and repair rifts when they happen. That's in the real world. But in many virtual relationships and networks, people can easily block others or quit when they are displeased. Relationships within such networks are usually more disposable. And because Gen Z and now Alpha have grown up in this environment, they have grown up learning this way to relate to other people. It is no longer just the digital relationships that are getting canceled, but the physical ones too. It is nothing to block somebody out of your own life. Our society has a problem. And it is a connection problem, except it's not an internet connection problem. It is an interpersonal problem, an interpersonal connection. Sociologist Brené Brown wrote, "Connection is why we're here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. And without it, there is suffering." Everybody knows that we need friendships. The problem is that we don't necessarily, especially in these last two generations, we don't necessarily know how to forge those friendships, and we certainly don't know how to maintain or grow those friendships. Few of us know how to get it. Few of us know what it means to have friendships, to have friends. C.S. Lewis helps us in this when he shows us that friendship is really different than any other relationship. He wrote, "Friendship is born the moment when one man says to another, 'What? You too? I thought I was the only one.'" In other words, friendship is a relationship that is based on commonality. When two or more people have something in common and they come together, when two or more people are passionate about the same or similar things, they come together and they forge a friendship, and that friendship is then based on this commonality. And it can be an extremely strong relationship. When we are children, we would go up on the playground, which, by the way, less and less children ever grow up on the playground these days. But we would grow up, and we would be on the playground, and we would see somebody on the swing set, and we would go, and little children, and, "Will you be my friend?" And of course, who doesn't want to be a friend? Yeah. And so then you start playing, and the problem is that we even realize this as friends, or as little children ultimately, because if my mindset of the games that we're going to play is this, and your mindset is this, then guess what? We will be at each other's throats. We will be at odds with one another, and a friendship isn't really actually born no matter what is said. Because friendship is developed, it is forged on commonality. We don't go up to people anymore as adults because we intrinsically realize that as we were growing up, that you can't just go up to someone and go, "Will you be my friend?" And then a friendship is born. It doesn't work that way. It's based on commonality. And it's based on work. When friendship does find that passion, that commonality, then we begin to find what Solomon says about friendship to be true in chapter 17, Proverbs 17, verse 17. "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." And so as we get into Proverbs, I know it was a little bit long introduction, but we're getting in there now. As we get into this section of Proverbs this morning, we are looking at Solomon's wisdom regarding friendship. And in these 5 main verses that we're looking at this morning, we see 3 insights about true and loving friendships. The first is that a true friend will help you. A true friend helps you. The second insight is that a true friend also hurts you. A true friend will hurt you on purpose. A true friend will also hone you. True friends hone you. And so let's get into this. That first insight that we're looking at comes from Proverbs 27, 9, and 10. And I start with this one, even though it's the verses in the middle between the others. I want to start here because this is what we often think of when we think about friendship. So let's go there and just read it one more time for our edification. "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. Do not forsake your friend and your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Now, Solomon wrote that a friend loves at all times. And what he meant by that is basically that a friend loves in every season of life. Whether things are going well or things are going poorly, a friend will be there. Because a friend loves, and therefore a friend helps. When life is going well, that friend of ours, he or she, is going to make life all the sweeter, like we see in verse 9. Oil and perfume, oh, makes the heart glad, doesn't it? Sweeter still is a friend. Makes things even better. But when life is difficult and you're in need, a friend is there to help bear that burden. That's what we see in verse 10. Now, we live in a different environment. We live in a different time frame, if you did not realize that, than Solomon. Did you know that? We live in a completely different type of world, a different society than Solomon did. We live post-automobile. And the automobile and the plane, they have made things a lot different for us than those who just lived even 200 years ago. It's a lot easier for us to get onto a plane and move into some other city far, far away, even a different country. We can be there within just a few hours. It's nothing to do that. It takes some courage, but it doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort. In biblical days, however, people rarely strayed from home. In fact, Solomon even says that it is not wise to stray from your hometown, from even your neighborhood. He says, don't forsake your friend or your father's friend. In other words, don't leave them behind. Don't move too far away. He likens it unto a bird. If you look at verse 8, chapter 27, verse 8, like a bird that strays from its nest is a man who strays from his home. There's danger when we move far away from family and from friends. And then he says that when we are in need, we aren't supposed to go to our brother's house. We're not supposed to go to our families when we are in need, which is strange. Why would we not want to go to our families? We grew up with our families. We grew up with our brother. We grew up with our siblings. Why in the world would we not want to go to them when we are in need? Why would we rather go to a friend? Why would Solomon tell us that it is more wise to go to a friend than it is to a family member? It has more than to do with just distance, right? Don't go to a brother who is far away. It's more than just distance. Remember, just a couple of minutes ago, I talked about how friendships are unique. Friendships are different than even brotherly relationships. We are born into a family. We have this familial love that we grow up with. But friends are unique in that they are commonalities that bring us to love one another, similar passions. Brothers or sisters rarely have the same passion that we do. There are exceptions. Remember that Proverbs are pithy statements of general truths. There are exceptions. But generally speaking, our brothers and sisters, they have their own passions. We have our own passions. But when we forge a friendship based on connectivity, on commonality, on passions, then all of a sudden what we see is that we can come together to face any trial in life. Solomon wrote about it in chapter 17. We just read it a moment ago. A friend loves at all time, and a brother is born for adversity. These are actually, they may at first seem like these are parallel ideas that, well, you got your friends over here and you got your brothers over here, and so a friend loves at all time. A brother's there when we are in need and we are in adversity, but these are actually parallel of opposites. If you've ever had siblings, raise your hand if you've had siblings before. That's most of us. We should all probably know that our siblings can bring adversity. Siblings will often give you grief and make life a whole lot more difficult. A brother will often focus on our failure, but a friend will help us to focus on the solution. It's not that the brother and sister won't help, But while they are doing so, they probably aren't going to let you forget it. And probably even after that, they probably won't let you forget it, right? If you had just done, this never would have happened. I already had to bail you out of this mess once. Now you're doing it again. I have to bail you out again. Are you serious? When are you ever going to learn? It's kind of how family would be. A friend who has the same passion as you, though, will passionately help you. And we see this in the life of David and Jonathan. When we think about friendship in the Bible, we cannot help but think about the friendship that goes between David and Jonathan. If we go back into 1 Samuel and we see where David is seen, and these two come together, we see something that's pretty interesting. Samuel has been ordered by God to go to Bethlehem, and he goes to Bethlehem, and then he gets there, and he's like, okay, so he's got to go to Jesse's house, and he's going to talk to Jesse because he's about to anoint the new king. And of course, we know the story, right? He goes to Jesse's house. All of his sons are there. 7 of the 8 are there. Samuel goes through. Nope. God keeps passing over all of them. He gets down to the last one, and God passes over the last one, and he says, do you not have any other children? And of course, Jesse says, oh, there's one that's watching the sheep out in the field. He wasn't thought much of by his family. And then we see, of course, he is the one who does get anointed, and then we see when he gets to the battle lines against the Philistines, and for the last 40 days, Goliath, the giant, has stood before them and mocked them for their fear. David gets there, taking his brothers some food and checking in, making sure everything was okay. And what does he get? He gets grief from his own brother. We see this in 1 Samuel 17, verse 28 and 29. Now, Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he says, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And then we see that Jonathan, he sees David defeat Goliath in the name of the Lord. And then he goes and he talks to Saul, his own father, King Saul, his own father, who was afraid to face Goliath. We don't have time to get into this whole relationship, but we see what happens when Jonathan sees the courage of David the warrior versus the fear of his father the coward. We see in 18:1, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, that's talking about David, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. If friendship is born, it is forged by commonality, then what in the world was the commonality between these two men? Both of these men had a passion for their country and a passion for the glory of God. And it brought these two men together. One of the greatest friendships in all of history came together. And when David was in trouble, he didn't go home, he didn't go and rely on his brothers, but he did rely on Jonathan. Jonathan was always there for him, even when it meant that Jonathan would not take his place on the throne when Saul, his father, died. Friendship with David was worth giving up his own kingdom in order for to help his friend's kingdom emerge. Friendship with David was worth giving up his own kingdom if it meant that his friend David's kingdom would emerge. The same ought to be true if we are hoping to be a friend of someone's. Except we would replace the word kingdom with the word life. And Jesus attests to this in John chapter 15 when he says, greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. Now that being said, let me give you a word of warning. Those who are developing such friendships need to hear this. It's not going to sound nice. Sorry. But in friendships, boundaries must be kept. Go with me just a couple of pages back, maybe just one page back to chapter 25, verses 16 and 17. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. Too much of a good thing can ruin it for you and for your friend. Now, it's kind of a joke here at Highland View that I am a man who does not like pineapple. And the reason that I don't like pineapple is because when I was a kid, my mom would get me pineapple and she would just give me remember the cans of pineapple, the rings? You remember that? Okay. She would give me a can of pineapple. Well, there was a day that I ate more than just one can. I just kept stuffing my mouth with pineapple until, guess what? I puked it all out. And now, I hate pineapple. Ever since that day, I hate pineapple. Just the smell of it nauseates me. If I taste it, it'll happen all over again. You know what I'm saying? I hate pineapple. Solomon, when he says this, when he talks about honey this way, he's not talking about honey. He's giving you an example that we would understand. Friendship can be sweet, and it can be sweet as honey. Remember that, right? So oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend. Honey can be so sweet and just so wonderful, and then friendship can make life so much sweeter. He says, but too much of a good thing can ruin it for you both, and therefore you need to be very careful. You can have your fill of honey and vomit it out, and so can your friend have his fill of you and hate you and never want to see you again. We need to be really careful about that. We need to take care to set boundaries. So the first insight that Solomon gives is that a true and loving friend helps you. The second is that a true and loving friend hurts you. And this sounds probably counterintuitive to that first one. Wait, if he's supposed to help me, then why would he ever hurt me? The difference lies, though, in why we would hurt a person. See, an enemy hurts out of rebellion, hurts out of vengeance or anger, malice, something like that. Pain that has been caused, some other evil intent. That's why an enemy hurts. A friend, however, hurts in order to teach or to protect, even if that means protecting us from ourselves. The motive behind the painful encounter is love. It's not malice. And I could go back to David and Jonathan if I really wanted to. We would see there how Jonathan actually broke the heart of David when he actually sent him away from his father's palace and away from his home in order to protect him. We see that he grieved deeply. He wept when that happened. I could take you there, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to extend this sermon, and I am going to tell you about the person who I think is probably the best example of a loving, hurting friend. That's Nathan. Nathan was one of King David's friends. He was an advisor, and he was a prophet of God. You probably know David's major sins, right? With Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, her husband. David was supposed to be in battle. Instead, he was at home and he was walking around on his palace. He looks down and he sees Bathsheba there taking a bath, and he calls her into his own room. And then when he finds out later that Bathsheba is pregnant with his child, he panics. He calls Uriah back home, and he tries to treat him well, and he tells him to go down and spend the night with his wife and enjoy her company, right? Hoping that maybe Uriah would cover up his indiscretion. But Uriah doesn't do that at all. Uriah refused to go home. And he refused to sleep in the comfort or enjoy the company of his wife while his men were in battle. And that's key because Uriah showed up King David. King David was supposed to be there leading his men, not staying at home, sleeping with another man's wife. So we know what happens, that ultimately King David sends Uriah back to the battle and ordered that the army fall back, leaving Uriah there to be killed, die at the hands of an enemy. And we would be foolish to think that only King David understood what was going on. Others had to have known. Joab especially, as he is the one who had received the order from David to fall back. David obviously is not the true friend in this case. True friend has yet to enter into the story, but he does enter in, and here comes Nathan. And he comes in to confront David. Now put yourself in Nathan's shoes for just a moment. What would you do if you had to confront the king of your nation? The king that had sinned so dramatically that he actually had sent one of his best men, one of the 30 mighty men of David, he had sent him to the front line and pulled his army back so that he would die alone at the hands of the enemy. That was the king, that was the person who has been your friend for so long, the one that you have advised for so long. He's the one that you actually have to confront about his sin. What would you think? How would you handle that? What would you do with that? Because I know that many of us are not confrontational. We don't want to confront people. We don't like to confront people. We would rather have people continue, we wouldn't say it this way. But the truth of the matter is we would rather have people continue on in their sin than have to confront them about it. But a true friend, a loving friend, will go confront and wound. Let's take a look. 2 Samuel 12, 1 through 4. See how Nathan handles this. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. How does he handle this? He tells a story. Little parable. He doesn't come barging in and wagging his finger and say, how dare you take Uriah's wife and have Uriah killed. He doesn't do that. He comes in gentleness. He comes in humility. He tells a little story to David. And the story that he is telling him is designed not simply to enrage David, but to disarm him. It is to disarm him, leaving him defenseless. Before Nathan could wound his friend, he first had to disarm his friend. And so he tells him a little story so that the unbiased judgment of David would come forth. His sense of justice. He would be reminded of his righteousness in the midst of his unrighteousness. And when he gets the result that he's looking for, that David has said, this man is evil and he shall pay for what he has done, that's when Nathan looks at him and says, but you are that man. And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to tell him the consequences of what's going to happen because of his evilness, his unrighteousness. Your house will constantly be at war with one another. Evil will befall it. David, you acted in secret, but your own wives will be taken in public. And it's almost as if David wanted him to stop. So he says, we see him repenting. I've sinned, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it, I apologize, I should never have done this. But Nathan doesn't stop. Imagine being in Nathan's shoes, having to continue on to tell him, rebuke him over and over again, and then tell him that his child would die. Can you imagine how Nathan must have felt in that moment? He had to tell his friend, his king, all those heartbreaking realities that came in the rebuke. And the writer of 2 Samuel ends it with this: Then Nathan went to his house. He had nothing else to say. His heart broke because he had to break the heart of a friend. And we know that David was broken not because he tried to stop Nathan in the middle of his rebuke, but because he wrote an entire psalm about his brokenness. And specifically in verse 8 of Psalm 51, let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. He was broken. Nathan's confrontation broke David. The rebuke was excruciating. But Nathan had to do it. Solomon wrote, better is open rebuke than hidden love. In fact, hidden love is unhelpful. It's unloving altogether. In our culture, an open rebuke is considered, a hidden love, let's try that again. In our culture, an open rebuke is considered to be unloving. But in God's sight, it is hidden love that is unloving. And it's more akin to an enemy than it is to a friend. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. A friend, a true friend, is called to wound when necessary. He's actually fulfilling his duties as a friend. She's fulfilling what God has called her to do. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. See, that's a friend that you can trust. The one who loves you enough to confront you when you are in the wrong. See, your enemies, they like to keep you close. We've heard that saying before, have we not? Keep your friends close and what? Your enemy closer. You know who says that? You know where that comes from? Sun Tzu, from the 8th century. And it has served many an enemy well to keep their friends close and their enemies closer. See, an enemy will shower us with kisses. They'll flatter us. They'll spoil us. They'll tell us exactly what it is that we want to hear and not what we need to hear. His kisses are profuse. He wants you to keep going in the direction that you're going. Napoleon Bonaparte said it well. He says, when your enemy is making a mistake, don't interrupt him. A friend interrupts the wrong, but a foe indulges it. So let me ask you this. Have you surrounded yourself with foes or friends? Stop and think about who it is that you consider to be friends in your life. Good, true friends in your life. Those who you have given access to speak regularly into your life. Think about those people. And then ask yourself, have I given into this desire to always be right and therefore have surrounded myself with yes people in order to bolster my pride and my self-esteem? Or have I surrounded myself with friends who will confront me with godly love in hopes of stopping me from making an ungodly mistake, or if it's too late, to call me unto godly repentance? Who's in my life right now? True, loving friend not only helps you, not only hurts you, but a true and loving friend also hones you. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. The actual Hebrew word here for another is actually the word friend, neighbor or friend. In fact, the literal translation of the verse is iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens the face of his friend, which sounds a little weird, until you realize that in ancient Hebrew culture, the broadside of a sword was called the face of a sword. That makes sense? And a friend, like iron on iron with a sword, is meant to sharpen the face of the friend. The friend sees the rough edges and seeks to smooth them out. Elihu was one such friend. If you're familiar with the book of Job, you probably remember that just about every calamity that could have befallen Job befell him. He lost his children, he lost his wealth, he lost his land, he lost his status. Ultimately, he would lose his health. And to top all of that off, his wife was embittered toward him and embittered toward God. And we remember that initially Job responds well. One of the most famous verses in all of Scripture. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And he sits there in dust, and he mourns, and his friends, he has 4 friends, that come, and they sit down with him, and they sit in the ashes with him, and they say nothing. They mourn with him for an entire week. But at the end of the 7 days, they begin to speak, and they unload on Job all these thoughts that they have had while they have sat there silent, mourning with this friend of theirs. And so, Job, you must have done something wrong. God's punishing you for something you've done wrong, some secret that nobody else knows about, but God has seen. Or, Job, it must have been your children. How's that for loving? Your children are the ones who sinned. They got what they deserved. And Job denies this, and he defends this. He defends himself. And then Job himself, in all of his rawness, begins to ask God questions. And then he accuses God of injustice. In chapter 10, we see, are your days as the days of man, or are your years as a man's years, that you seek out my iniquity and search for my sin? Is life so short for you, God, that all you can do is go around and look and see and try to poke into my life and see where I have wronged you? Is that how petty you are, God? You got nothing better to do? Although you know that I am not guilty and there is none to deliver me out of your hand. The tolls of his friends' accusations become apparent at this point. Job is hurting, and he is angry. As far as he can tell, he has done absolutely nothing wrong, and we are told at the very beginning that he didn't do anything wrong. He feels like God is picking on him. And that feeling just gets worse and worse, and he's battling against the devil, and he's battling against his friends, and he's battling against his wife, and he's even battling against himself. In many ways, he is battling against God. And all this battle, swinging the sword, trying to defend himself, the more that he is beginning to get dinged, and burrs are showing, and cracks in this sword of his, and it's just becoming dull and useless. And so finally, one last friend steps in. Elihu. And don't get me wrong, Elihu's not perfect. He's not the perfect man, but what he says helps to hone the face of Job and his three friends. And we see in chapter 32, he says, so these three men, this is Elihu speaking, and these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. They burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. And he goes on then for the next 5 chapters, yes, 5 chapters, giving a speech, honing the face of Job. We can summarize it in chapter 33, the last few verses of chapter 33. Behold, God does all these things twice, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be lighted with the light of life. Pay attention, O Job. Listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have any words, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Be silent, and I will teach you wisdom. He's not thinking of himself grandiosely. He's thinking of himself as a good friend who needs to hone the rough edges of a hurting man. In the words of John Piper, this is what he says, the suffering of the righteous is not a token of God's enmity, but of his love. It is not a punishment of their sins, but a refinement of their righteousness. It is not a preparation for destruction, but a protection from destruction. God himself then speaks to Job before Job could ever respond to Elihu. And having been honed by Elihu and polished by God, Job repents. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. And then God actually requires from Job to make a sacrifice on behalf of his 3 friends. Not for Elihu. Elihu did not need to make a sacrifice for him because he spoke truth in order to hone Job's rough edges. He spoke to his friends with wisdom, sharpening their understanding of themselves and of the Lord. Beloved, there are people in your lives, family members, co-workers, friends, church members maybe, that have faulty understanding of who God is. And it may be because they're new to the faith and they just don't get it all, or it could be that they are just, again, they're hurting, and so they have made claims about God in their pain and in their frustration, and they're speaking out of those feelings rather than what is real, and so there is this conflict with the truth. Or it may just simply be that they've just been taught incorrectly. They have gone and they have heard false teachers and false preachers, and they just don't get it, and they have all these misunderstandings about who God is. There are a number of reasons that their faces need to be honed. A true friend will come alongside and sharpen them. Then again, there are just some. It has nothing really necessarily to do with doctrine at all. It's not really against God at all. These verses that we read in Proverbs, they're not about God in particular. They're just about friends who have rough edges. It could be with other people. Maybe they speak too harshly. We've heard that before, right? That he's a nice guy, but he's just a little rough around the edges. They're a little too harsh, too gruff, too coarse. And they need somebody to come and to lovingly hone those edges, sharpen them a little bit. It's what friends do. But don't leave here thinking that you are perfectly sharp yourself, because you may be the one that needs to be honed. If you stopped and you were like, oh, I know somebody that needs to hear this, you might want to stop and check yourself. Let's pull the log out of our own eye before we pull the speck out of someone else's. My question is, will we have the humility to allow someone to come beside us and be a friend who will hone us? Or are we going to rebuff their efforts because we think we're too righteous and too good? Because we're not. We have rough edges. We have burrs and we have cracks and we have dings. And someone needs to come in and hone us, or else we will come to ruin. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 18, he says, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. If all we have are companions that are around us that won't come and hone us, we very well may come to ruin. We need a friend who comes beside us, sticks closer than a brother in order to hone us. We will be all the better for it. So as we finish this time in Proverbs, we found 3 insights about what a friend is. A friend helps, a friend hurts, and a friend hones. That's the love of a friend. It takes its different forms, but that's what a true and loving friend will do. It's tempting when a friend seeks to hurt us for our own good and out of their own love. It is tempting for us to cancel them, to block them, to ignore them, to ghost them. It's what we've learned. We have to fight against that temptation because it is God who has put that friend in our lives for our good, to give us a type of love that no one else can give. And as cheesy as it might sound, your best friend and my best friend was born just over 2,000 years ago. He is our best friend. Jesus is the friend that sticks closer than a brother. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He is always there. He says of himself that he will be there until the end of the age and then into eternity as well. And if you don't know Jesus as your friend, you will never know the help that he can give, the difference that he can make. Does he help us? Absolutely. He helps us in our time of need. In fact, it's not just simply that he helps us, but he opens access to the Father who will also help. Because he's not just a friend, but when he becomes our friend, he also becomes our high priest, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, and yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. Does he hurt us? He certainly does. Because he sees the sin that we will never see, that our friends will never see. And he is determined to cut the sin away. And he has sent his Spirit to convict us of our sin, to tell us no when all we want to hear is yes. Does he hone us? Without a doubt. He smooths out our rough edges, and he even left us as an example for when we seek to be rough. He leaves us his example of being gentle and lowly, that we may be able to conform to him. But it is only possible if we are trusting him with our lives, We trust him in his life and his death and in his resurrection. Without putting all of our confidence, all of our reliance on his life and his death and his resurrection, all of life, in this life and in the next life, for all of eternity, you will never know him as friend. You will never know him as Savior. You will never know him as Lord. You will never know his help, his hurt, or his honing. He is not only our hope in death, he is our hope in life as well. And those of you who have trusted in him, remember that he is your truest, most loving of friends. And in his friendship, not only has he given you his Spirit, but he has given you friends that will do the work of the Spirit when we're not listening.